I just want to wrap my mind around this, but maybe I go to you first, Professor. But we started to unpack this a little bit. As a Twitter user or a Facebook user, or whatever, make a choice independently of anyone to share an article, which I did this morning from the Times of London, because it had to do with COVID and some of the new research that was pertaining to their vaccination efforts. So I make a choice that is completely divorced from the platform. The platform didn't know I was going to make that choice. They didn't have any say in whether I made that choice or not. And then by virtue of that, somehow they're now financially responsible to the Times of London. Is that the essence of the issue here, Professor?
That is the argument. Let me give you a slightly different analogy. If you had had a physical copy of the Times of London, which is a great newspaper, if you had a physical copy of that newspaper and you'd cut it out, put the cutting into an envelope and posted it to a friend, the logic of this argument would be that the post office would have to pay money to the Times of London. Now, we all immediately recognize that that is a completely absurd situation. And yet all of a sudden people get bamboozled with new technology. And also the Australian government have been quite disgraceful in sort of leaning into the techlash. You know, the whole argument that somehow all these new things are bad for us, because new things are always bad for us, you know. So that they've leaned into this whole anti-progress, anti-technology approach in order to bail out the legacy media who to genuinely have actually lost advertising revenue from their cross-subsidization model. And the correct solution to all of this is, of course, is to say to the legacy media, you guys need to come up with a new profitable business model, not actually leech off your more successful competitors.
David, I know you've been following the debate here in Canada. You mentioned our heritage minister and some of his musings. Where do you see this going?
Well, I'm hoping that they can see the disaster that was the negotiation process between tech companies and news agencies and really see the devastating impact that that can have on ordinary Canadians. And I'll give you an example. So in that negotiation process, Facebook stopped allowing their users to share links to Australian news providers, somewhat in an act of protest, but also to highlight what would happen really if the government were to pursue this policy full freight. Now, imagine only being able to get your news from picking the individual news site that you want to go to, and then multiply that irritation by the fact that we're in a global pandemic and social media, which has certainly had its issues with controlling misinformation, is arguably the largest source of spreading public health information about how to deal with this virus. And so we're living in a time where social media is in comparison to nothing else we've ever seen, distributing important public health information for free. And now these news agencies have maybe successfully lobbied the government in Canada to try and get a piece of the pie that isn't theirs.
Sinclair, I want you to answer as well, but also take into account the way it was portrayed was that the Australian government won and Facebook lost. Is that accurate too?
I don't think so. Certainly in the Australian media, that is how it's been playing out. But in actual fact, this has been about a 2-year process where our competition authority, the Australian Competition Consumer Council Commission, brought out a report where they wanted a whole range of things, including having access to Facebook and Google's algorithms. That's more or less their core business models. They wanted them to simply hand them over to a random government authority here in Australia. And they wanted this negotiation model and a whole bunch of other things. About 6 weeks ago, Google ran an experiment where they actually shut off Australia from some of their media searches. And the government very quickly entered into negotiations with Google and changed the things that Google didn't like.